Welcome back. What's up, everyone? Today what we're going to do is work on adding web push to our Rails application, or to a Rails application. Web push is that thing where you're in the browser and you'll get a notification. So you might have seen these from like when you receive an Instagram message or when someone comments on something on Reddit. Lots of web applications are starting to implement this thing where you'll get like a little pop-up notification. And in Apple, it'll even show in your notifications bar here on the right side. And so the way this works is you can dig into a lot of the details by going through this Web Fundamentals course that is here on the developers Google Docs. But it turns out that there is a Ruby gem called Web Push. This is a really nice gem that handles a lot of stuff for you. And so we're going to go through the process of setting up the gem. And there's these 5 steps that you have to do. I think a couple of them are optional, but we're going to go through the process of setting all this up so that we can run a little notification when we receive. So the idea would be that we're going to continue building on our Form 4 application, and we want to be notified when an interesting trade happens on the SEC's website. This could be any number of things, though. Anytime you want to notify your customer, you might want to send a web push. And so we're going to go through these steps. Number 1 is we're going to generate a VAPID key. So it's a voluntary application server ID key. And then we are going to set up a manifest.json. You don't actually need to do this. It'll work without it. But then we're also going to install a service worker, which is just a little bit of JavaScript that will run in the background. You can sort of like install it permanently in the browser, I think, like sort of, that's kind of how you can think about it. And then from the server, we can use the web push gem to publish a notification to some endpoint that we'll get back from a subscription, which we get back from the push manager. And then ultimately our service worker is going to listen for these push events and can trigger these notifications that actually pop up. So there's a few different things that are happening here. Let's go through the process and do step 1 here, which is we're going to generate this one-time key. So I'm going to jump into the terminal, and in my gem file, I'm just going to add gem. I think it's web push. Yeah, so web push, and we'll bundle install. So we're going to install that web push gem, and it has some tools for generating this one-time key. It turns out you only need to run this step one time. So we're just going to use this function of the gem to create our VAPID keys. So we're going to say keys are web push.generate key. And this is going to give us both a public and private key. So we can say keys.public key is this, and keys.private key is this. So we're just going to store this public key and private key in our Rails credentials so that we can use these keys when we're making when we're publishing notifications to these web push endpoints. So I'm going to grab this key that ends in an equals sign, and let's just open a new terminal here, Form 4 tracker. So I'm going to say Rails credentials editor, Rails credentials :edit. This will open up my Rails credentials for this application. I already have my Alpha Vantage key here, so I'm going to just say web push, and I'm going to say okay, so we're going to do public key first, and we're going to copy and paste our public key, and then we'll do private key. And we'll drop in our private key. And after this is over, I'm going to change these keys. So there's no need to copy them. All right, so now that we've got these in our credentials, we should be able to use them in our application. So that's kind of a step 1 here. So we're going to say exit, clear, and all right, so let's go to the next step here. We want to create a manifest.json file that's going to be linked, and that has like a bunch of settings for our application. So let's just go to the public directory and create manifest.json. And in here, this is just going to be a JSON object that defines things about our web application. So there's a whole doc here on MDN about all of the different things that you can set inside of a web manifest. I think the one we want for sure is our name, We're just going to call this like form for tracker or something. I don't actually know what the name is going to be or if it's going to have a real name. You can also put things like links to icons and such inside of here, default background colors, start URLs, etc., etc. There's like a whole bunch of things that you can drop in to your web manifest. We're just going to put the name for now, and we'll call that good. All right, the next thing we want to do is in the user's browser, we want to add a service worker. And so if we scroll down in the docs here for the web push gem, we'll see a little bit of information about how we register this service worker. So it turns out that like when you call navigator.serviceworker.register, you're going to pass it a path. And this path is to a JavaScript file that we want to like install basically into the browser when the user loads the browser. So we need to create some JavaScript file that's going to be at a well-known public location. So in the same directory here, in the same public directory, I'm going to just create a service worker.js. Whoops. .js. Okay. And then here, I'm just going to say console.log, like hi from the service worker. And that's it. That's all we're going to put in there for now is just hi from the service worker. And then let's create a new controller just to like experiment with this and test it out. Say Rails G controller notifications. We'll give it an index view. This will be just kind of like a view that we can drop into. I'm going to go to my routes file and make sure that we have this resources notifications. And then in our notification index, we need to do a couple of things here. So we're going to add a script tag to this page that will actually register the service worker. You could probably put this in your app manifest, or I'm sorry, in your application.js or some other place, but we're just going to keep everything right here just so that we can see it all in one place and keep it real simple for now. Okay, so when we're installing the service worker, actually this should totally work fine for installing. So let's actually just copy and paste this in. And we called our service worker. Oh, it says to put this in application.js. Whatever, it doesn't matter. We'll keep it right here. All right, so then, all right, so if there is so if window.navigator.serviceworker exists, then we're going to register this service worker file. And then after this registration is going to return a promise that resolves with the registration thing. And then we're going to console.log the service worker change, register the service worker. And then if there is no service worker on the navigator, then we're just going to console.log the service worker is not supported in this browser. Okay, so at this point, I want to probably restart the server since we installed some gems and things, and then head back over to the browser and go to localhost 3000. And I'm going to go to /notifications and open up the developer tools here. And look at that, we already have the log statements that we were hoping for. So down here we see hi from the service worker, and we also see the service worker change, register the service worker. And you'll notice that in the sources tab on the left, underneath at the very bottom here, we see service worker has these little gears. We can open that up and it'll tell us that it's talking about the service worker from this domain, from localhost with port 3000. And if we click on service worker, we can see the code for our service worker. So this is all working great. So what we want to do now is when we register the service worker, we want to set up a subscription, a push subscription. And so the way that that works is we use the public key that we generated earlier, that public VAPID key, and we call, what do we call? We call subscribe. So we're going to say like, as soon as the service worker is ready, we're going to subscribe and we're going to pass in our VAPID public key. Now it needs to be in like a very specific format. So we're going to just add the VAPID key directly to the window in some, I mean, we don't have to actually add it to the window. We can just use this and set it up in a similar way. So at the very top, I'm going to say that our VAPID key is, what is this? Const VAPID key uint array. So base64 URL safe decode 64. And then our VAPID public key is available in rails.application.credentials.dig web push and public key. Okay. So if we refresh the page here and go to notifications, we should see a public key. Okay, so we see the the unsigned integer array that has our public key just dropped directly right here. And so that's our VAPID public key. So that's great. The next step is to actually pass that as an argument, as the application server key argument. When the service worker is ready, we want to like call this subscribe, which is going to give us back a subscription. And that subscription, depending on which browser it is and which web push endpoints it's giving you back, it'll give you a different endpoints and different like authorization tokens, which says that you are allowed to send notifications to this customer. Now, every single, when they were building the spec out, they were thinking about allowing developers to create push notifications to the browser and not notifying the customer or not notifying the user. But they thought that people would do naughty things like start tracking their location and such. And so they added this flag to the API spec that said you have to pass user visible only as true. And then the idea would be that like by saying user visible only, we're going to notify the user and they're going to see something. And there's discussions about maybe passing or building other mechanisms by which you could have some budget of requests that you could use to send to the customer's browser. But for now, you have to like show a notification. You can't just like do stuff in the background without them knowing about it. So this is an argument that you have to pass, even though it doesn't really do anything. It just says that like you are committing to like showing a notification when you send them something. Then we also have to pass our application server key. So this is with VAPID. You can also do this without VAPID if you are in Chrome only and you're using this GCM sender ID thingy. Okay, so let's grab this. So when the service worker is supported, installed, and activated, subscribe to the push manager property with the VAPID public key. So we're just going to grab this, and we need to drop this in here. Okay, I think, right? So we're going to register the service worker, and then we are going to say if the service worker is ready, then we have the registration and the push manager. We're going to subscribe, and we're going to pass it our VAPID public key. And I believe this should resolve with a subscription. So let's take a look here. So once it's ready, push manager.get subscription. Okay, so right. Yes, so for now, let's just console.log the result of this, of subscribe. So we're going to say .then function. I'm like 90% sure, args. I'm 90% sure this is going to give us a push, like it's going to be of type push subscription, and it'll be right here. So I'm just going to call it sub, and we should be able to console.log it here. Console.log like sub. Okay, so we're saying like register the service worker, then when it's ready, subscribe, and then we're going to console.log the subscription if it worked. So if we refresh this page here, do you see how this notification popped up and says, do you want to show notification? So when we call subscribe, this is us asking the user for permission to send them notifications. And if they say allow, so I'm sure you've seen this, right? You're going around on, maybe you're on a gaming site, or you're on, Instagram is the one that just keeps coming to mind, right? When you get a notification that someone has like liked your picture or whatever, then you'll get a notification. So when we call subscribe here and say allow, we're giving permission to localhost 3000 to send notifications to us. So what we can do now is we can say allow, and you'll notice that like our promise here is resolving with a push subscription object, okay? And that has an endpoint. So in this case, it's using the Google API's FCM. I don't know what FCM stands for, but depending on which browser you're using, it might create an endpoint that goes to some other domain, some other URL. And in fact, this endpoint is going to be unique to this specific subscription. So if we were to like unregister our service worker later and then try to re-ask for permission to send notifications, we would get a different endpoint. So at this point, what we want to do is say like json.stringify sub, and that's going to be the JSON representation for the subscription that we want to store in our database, in our Rails application, so that we can use web push to send a notification. So there's kind of a lot going on here. So we registered the service worker. We've got permission. Once we get permission, it yields to us this subscription object. We're going to take the data from the subscription object. We're going to put it in the database. And then we're going to use web push on the server to basically send a request to the endpoint associated with the subscription and whatever other data that we want to send. It's almost like a webhook for the browser. So you can kind of think of that endpoint as like a webhook endpoint for the browser, where we're pushing a notification to the browser, and then the browser can pop up the little notification window on the side. So what we want to do now is, instead of just console.logging the subscription here, we want to like make an API call to pass this stringified subscription to the server, and then we want to save that into some database model that will likely be related to some customer later, or to some user model later, and then we can send notifications to that user until they decide to unsubscribe. So let's do that now. Let's go create, like in our notifications controller, let's create create endpoint. And this will accept post requests. Let's say skip auth. I'm just going to skip verifying authenticity so we can keep it super simple. And the data that we're getting back is going to have like an endpoint, expiration time, auth, like a whole bunch of little things here. So what does this actually give us? So let's say json.parse of this thing. I just want to see like the actual JSON object. Interestingly, if you just say sub, it doesn't, like the class, the push subscription class doesn't let you see the keys, which is probably some security mechanism. So by stringifying it, we pop out the keys. And then by like this little trick of like stringifying and then parsing is just to get us like back to just a normal JSON object that doesn't have this class of push subscription. Anyways, we're going to need the endpoint, expiration time, and then the keys are going to give us like this auth token and then P256DH. No idea what that is or like what it stands for, but we need to pass this data when we're making a push request. So let's actually say like, let's say that we want to create a new notification model. So we'll say Rails G model web push notification, and it's going to have an endpoint, and it's going to have auth key and P256DH key, and those will all be strings. And then we don't have any user models yet, but eventually we might want to add user models later. So we're going to create a model called web push notification. The reason I'm not just calling it notification here is that I want to try out Chris Oliver's notified gem later, and I don't know if it's going to collide. So I'm just going to name this web push notification. And then we can say rake db migrate, sure, like migrate the database. Oh gosh, what's going on here? Gem cleanup. I don't know why we need Sinatra. That's interesting. Whatever. Okay, so it migrated fine. Whatever. Let's go to back to our notifications controller. And in here, we're going to say web push notification dot web push notification.create or .new, and then we'll say endpoint is so I was thinking about using strong params, but I don't think we want to, because this keys thing is like nested inside of the object. So I'm just going to kind of like keep it all top level. We'll just say like params endpoint, and then oh gosh, what did we call this thing? So bundle exec annotate -- models, bundle, or like annotate bundle exec annotate -- models. Boom. Okay, so in our web push notification model here, we have our endpoint, we have our auth key, that's going to be params keys auth, And then we have our P256 key, which is going to be params keys P256DH. And then we'll say, this is I don't know, at notification, if at notification.save, else, and I don't know, we'll just like say render JSON for at notification, else render JSON notification.errors.full messages. Sure, I don't know, just trying to like create the web notification model, basically. Okay. And then from our JavaScript, right, in our notifications index.html file here, rather than just console logging this subscription, we want to make a fetch call that's going to be a post request to notifications, and we're going to pass in the stringified subscription, and then we'll get back the data, and we'll just say like console.log data. Which should like save that to our database. So if we come back over here and we hard refresh, await is only valid inside async functions. Okay, can I just say async? Let's see. Okay, look at that. Okay, cool. So since we already allowed localhost 3000 to send us notifications, it doesn't ask us again unless we unregister the service worker, I think. So if we click play now, we got back ID 1. So this is actually like the JSON for the Rails model that came back. So this is fantastic. If we jump into Rails console here, Rails C, we'll see the web push notification.last is our, it has our endpoint, it has an auth key and a PSD, whatever. Wow, awesome. It filtered it. That's cool. So those are secret. Like you can't see those. I'm going to unregister this anyway, so you're not going to be able to like send anything to me, but whatever. Okay, what's next? What's next here? So we've got our service workers installed, and its push manager property subscribe to events, and it's creating a subscription JSON object on the client. We passed that to the server. We've saved it on the server. All right, so we're on to step 4 here, which is we're going to use that web push gem to send a notification with that subscription object obtained from the client and some optional payload message. Hopefully this works. Let's see. Let's see what we can do. So from here, I think we might even be able to say like web push dot payload send. Yeah. Okay. So where's this method? Payload send. Okay. So we want to send some message. We'll say like test, and we want to send the endpoint, which is going to be, let's actually store this notification.last in some variable. So we'll say like n equals underscore. Because the most recently run thing was web notification.last, we can use the underscore to reference the most recently run thing. And then we can say, yeah, so let's clear this and say, okay, so web push.payload send. And we're going to send message is test, and we're going to send endpoint is n.endpoint, and this P256DH thing is n.P256DH key, and then there's auth, which is going to be n.auth key, and then we also need to pass a hash under VAPID, and that is going to be our private key, which is going to be rails.application.credentials.dig web push. I almost wonder if they should make like a nice helper method for this that would just be like creds dot something, and it would just be a shortcut for that, because I don't like writing out rails.application.credentials every single time. It's super annoying. Please make that a thing. Private key. And then same thing for public key. And here we're going to say rails.application.credentials. Or actually, yeah, could you leave a comment below? Tell me how you do this. Do you always write out rails.application.credentials.dig, or like you use square brackets to reach into this, or are you kind of like destructuring it before you make the call? Because this is painful. If you've got a workaround, I would love to hear that. So please leave a comment. Would love to hear what you've got going on there. So web push, public key, and I don't know, should we give it a whirl? Look at that. Okay, 201 created. Okay, but I don't see any notifications popping up. Oh, do you know why? It's because even though we have successfully sent the notification, we have not actually set up the last step here, which is to make the service worker receive push events and then trigger the notifications. So I think we have this web push thing working maybe. Let's actually extract this call and drop it into as like a helper method in notification, because it's kind of annoying to have to write that every time. So let's go to notification and let's just say like send, or like def send. And I'm just going to paste this in and then clean it up. Okay, so now we should be able to say just like web push notification.last.send test, and it should plop that test notification in front of us once we've completed our JavaScript implementation here. So let's go back to notifications index, and we need to add the code. Oh, actually, no, we need to go to our service worker to add the code to then like listen for push events. So this is, again, this service worker is code that's gonna like run in the background, and we're sort of installing this JavaScript into the browser. And what we wanna do now is we wanna handle, or we wanna like listen for those notifications that are coming to that endpoint. And so the way that this works is this is kind of like setting up a webhook handler almost. So we're gonna set up a listener here, and this works a little bit odd. we actually say like self.add event listener, I believe. So let's find the code for that. Yeah, so this is what we're gonna do here. So I'm just gonna grab this and yeah. And we'll drop it in here. So instead of saying like window.add event listener or document.add event listener, we can say self. And in this case, self refers to the service worker itself. Okay, and then we're gonna say push, and this is the event type that we're listening for on the service worker. And this is the event type that will happen. That's the event type that's gonna fire when we receive a push notification. Okay, so we're gonna get the event data, and the event data's text, or we're gonna say yay message, and then we're gonna pass, we're calling event.waitUntil, and then calling show notification. So this is what should actually like pop up the notification. And so let's just see if we can get this popping in the browser. So I'm gonna hard refresh and then click on service worker, and you'll notice that like the code for the service worker here didn't change. And I think that's because even though we changed the code on /public like service worker.js, it didn't like bust the cache or whatever. So if we come back over here and hard refresh this, then come to service worker, then it knows like, okay, we have some new stuff happening here. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that even though we're refreshing the page, okay, so we're running into an issue, because every time we reload the page, these promises are sort of like just going to resolve successfully if we've already done that thing. So if we've already registered the service worker, it's going to resolve successfully. If the service worker is ready, it's going to resolve successfully. If we're already subscribed, it's going to resolve successfully with the same subscription. And then we're going to call the /notifications, and we're going to try again to create another subscription in the database. And so you'll notice that the data here that's being logged out, we have 5, we have 4, we have 3. So we're actually creating several web push notification objects in the database, even though nothing is changing for each of them. So actually, let's look at that. So you'll notice that the auth key is not changing. So if you have a new subscription that is legit new, then the auth key is going to be different. So I think what we want to do is we want to modify our create endpoint to make it more like a create or update endpoint, where we're going to just look using the auth key. We'll try to find an existing web push notification object in the database. If it exists, we'll make it a no-op. But we can make that improvement in just a second. So let's just try to confirm that. So that's a bug. We'll come back and fix the bug in a second. But so if we say web push notification.last, we should be able to say like .send like test. And oh my gosh, okay. You can't see it on that screen because it's on my other screen, but we received a push notification. So if we come over here and we look at my notifications, you can see that I received this test notification from localhost, and it says we have received a push message. So this is the type of message that you're going to see. I don't know how Apple organizes where that pops up on the desktop. Mine happens on this other screen, so you can't see it when it's popping up, but it's so exciting because it's working. So we've got to fix our one little bug, and that is to only create or update, only create these subscriptions if the auth key is different, and then we should be good to go. All right, so let's jump out of Rails console. Let's go back to our notifications controller, and let's go to our endpoint here. So we're going to say like @notification equals web push notification dot find by auth key, and we'll pass in params keys auth, and if @notification, or actually we don't even need an instance variable here. We can just use a local variable. So if there's no notification, then we'll create a new one. That way we don't end up creating a whole bunch of notifications for the same subscription. And ideally, right, we would have a logged in current user, and we could create this web notification for that user. So we might say like user equals current user or similar, so that we can associate all the different subscriptions. Maybe the user has like a personal laptop, and then they have their iPad, or I don't know, like they have their Android device or something, and they want to register on a whole bunch of different machines. Like you could set up different subscriptions for each of their devices, sort of. That's like kind of one way that you might think of it. And so a user would have many web push notification subscriptions. So this might even be better named as like web push subscription or something. But for now, whatever, web push notification. Yeah, because a notification would be like the individual notification. So notification is a bad model name, but we got it working. And that's what matters. So okay, so the other thing that I wanted to see was that the actual content here, we have received a push message. I believe that's defined as part of the this index here, or I'm sorry, the service worker. So we have received a push message. So technically, I think that you could pass this data from the server. In our case, for our like sort of stock tracking thing, we're going to probably want to send, the ticker symbol, some trade information, who was the trader, how much did they exchange, etc. So we'll come back and we'll make those adjustments to kind of like connect our polling for the Form 4 service to this web push notification system in a future episode. Hopefully this was useful. I really like playing around with this stuff. So if you enjoyed this episode and if you made it this long, I would really appreciate if you just took a quick second and threw a like onto this video. Otherwise, if you're enjoying this content, continuing on with this series, and we'll keep working on our tool to track the stock trades that are happening on the Security and Exchange Commission. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.